Monday's scary reading. The video today is going to be live. Oh, yeah. These stories are Reddit, subreddit, royalty-free stories. So, the first story, let me switch music really quick. Do 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 do. Oh. Okay. The first story is Night Shift in a Care Home. It's by Bearded Bamboozle. I recently found some Let's Read type channels on YouTube and decided to try and write down an experience I had a few years ago, as it seems similar to the content being posted. I'm 27 years old, male, live in the UK with my fiance and for teenagers with special educational needs in a school not far from Bradgate Park in, sorry for the pronunciation of this, Leicestershire. I have worked in a number of schools and children's homes now, and these buildings, especially the children's homes, are usually old, renovated houses or halls. This particular story happened in 2013 when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teenagers and young adults, 18 through 30 years old, with autism, brain damage, and challenging behavior. The house that I worked in was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a games room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden with a summer house slash activity room that led onto acres of fields and woodland. I had been working there for about 3 weeks and primarily worked the waking night shift. This shift ran from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. and it was my duty to make sure all of the residents were settled for the night and to get the cleaning done before the day staff came in to take over. I would usually get all my jobs done for around 1 a.m. and spend the rest one that woke up. I would watch TV, read my university course books, and sometimes just play games on my phone once I was finished. The residents usually slept all night. On one particular night, a young man named James, not the actual name for legal reasons, was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he had a lot of strength behind him. When he got into one of his bad moods, and the slightest thing could set him off, he once threw a member of staff through a patio door because she had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form full sentences and would communicate with fairly simple words put together in a way that he understood. For example, he would say something like, "James, make breakfast," when he was ready to make breakfast, or "James, go outside," if he wanted to go outside and play. He was generally well behaved and could be quite funny when he wanted to be, but was well known for his temper. At around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself, and he went back upstairs without any real bother. I sat on the top step and kept an eye on his door for maybe 15 minutes or so to make sure he didn't wake any of the other residents. Once he had settled, I went back to my cleaning. The room beneath James' bedroom was a communal living room with board games, a TV, sofas, books, and stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something heavy drop onto the floor in the room above. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on his door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm, and his eyes looked almost half shut, like he had been asleep. I asked if he was okay, and he said yes and put his thumb up. And this was something he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out, so I left him to it and told him to be careful, thinking that he had knocked something over. An hour or so passed, and by now I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another bang above me, again like something had been dropped. This time I realized that the room above the kitchen was currently empty. The house was set up to house 5 residents, but there were only currently 4, and the room above me was the spare, empty room. I immediately went to check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a while, and as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep due to the nature of their conditions / behaviors. Each resident has an alarm fitted to their door that is activated at night, so if anyone leaves their room, a small receiver box that the night staff carry around makes a noise, and a light blinks for a few seconds to indicate which door had been opened, numbered 1 through 5. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise was not from any of the residents. We got back to my cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and as I entered the hallway, I could tell that something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs, covering his ears and humming loudly, and 3 members of the staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to the sitting room, and the house manager gave me a rundown of what had been going on. For the last 4 hours, James had been quite agitated and kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl." When asked what was wrong, this was something we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a movie that stuck in his head and made him repeat this phrase. Once James had settled in bed, the night staff left, and the other member of staff that was sleeping in went up to the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks and, as usual, finished around 1 a.m. Soon after this, I went upstairs to do a quick check on all the residents, but as I got onto the first floor landing, I noticed the light had been turned off. There were 2 small corridors leading to the bedrooms on the left and right-hand sides of the staircase. James' room was on the left, and the light switch was just outside his room. I turned the corner to flick the switch, and there, in the darkness and complete silence, was James. He was stood in the corner, completely naked, with his eyes as wide as he could possibly hold them. I'm a big guy, 6'3" and weigh about 220 pounds, but at that moment I was really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James and asked what was going on, and for a while he said nothing at all. Then, as I turned the light back on, he let out an ear-piercing scream and started slapping himself around the face. The sleep-in staff woke up at this point and helped me to calm the situation and get James back into bed before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night, I had 4 days off. My shift pattern was 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on and 4 days off. And I was relieved that this incident had happened just as my time off began. I got back to work the following week and was told that the situation with James, talking about the little girl, had hours staring out of the window that overlooked the garden, saying, "Little girl, where are you, little girl?" And no one knew where he had heard the phrase. That night around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that the door to room 5, the spare room, had been opened. Now, this instantly seemed a bit weird, as the door to the spare room is always kept locked because it was being used for storage at the time. I went up to investigate and found James stood in the room in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me entering and was just stood there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched his shoulder and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's get you back to bed. It's late." James turned around and started heading back to his room, and for a second I was relieved, but then as I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed out, "Oh no!" and started pummeling the door with both fists. As he did this, the alarm went off to indicate that the front door had been opened. The only people with a key to the front door were myself and the night wake staff and the house manager. The door has 4 locks on it, 2 that require a key and 2 that require electronic ID cards. It was now 3:25 a.m. and the manager never came in before 8 a.m., so I presumed there must have been some kind of mistake, and continued to diffuse the situation with James. He finally calmed down and went back into his room, so I went downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately and started checking every room in the house in case someone had got in. I then checked on each of the residents to make sure that they were all still in the house. Everything was fine. The next night, everything was calm until around 2 a.m. when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said that someone was tapping on his window. I guess that he must have just been dreaming, as his window was on the 3rd floor of the house and was at least 25 feet from the ground. I went back up to his room with him to reassure him and checked his window. Sure enough, it was shut, and the security lock that prevents it from opening wide enough for someone to fit through, it was still sealed. As he got back in bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside of his room. He froze for a second and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see who it was, but no one was there. He was clearly scared by this and said, "Is he back?" My blood ran cold and I asked, "Is who back?" "What do you mean?" Connor looked over my shoulder and then sank down into his bed, pulling the V up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was still no one there. "Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that there was no one there and left his bedside lamp on before leaving the room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was the middle of January and around -2 outside, but I felt like I had to get out of the house for a while. After about 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard beneath the drawer where all of the sharp knives are kept until needed. The drawer was open slightly. This was obviously a major issue, as none of the residents were allowed access to the knife drawer without supervision. I counted the knives and realized that there was one missing, so I woke the sleep-in staff, told her the situation, and we began a search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still hadn't found this missing knife, so decided to just keep our guard up and make sure none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at 5:30 a.m., the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room again. I went up to check it out and found that the door was locked. How could the alarm have been activated by the door opening if the door was still locked? I went inside and turned the light on. To this day, I still have no explanation for what I found, and I often think about this incident. The bed had been pushed from its usual place and was against the wall, and the wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. But the most disturbing part, in the middle of the room, there was a children's doll, a gold bracelet, and the missing knife from the kitchen. And the doll was an old-style baby doll. My guess was that it was made in the 1950s. From the style of the clothes and the overall look of the doll, the bracelet was simple but old-looking. I left everything as it was and reported it to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed that the bracelet belonged to them, and it was taken to a charity shop soon after, along with the doll. After the doll and the bracelet were removed from the house, James seemed to calm down and never mentioned a little girl or stood around in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything that happened, and sometimes think that it was just a combination of strange behavior from a young autistic guy and the fact that the house is old. But on the other hand, a lot of stuff happened that I can't explain logically. My only regret now is that the doll and the bracelet are gone and can't be examined or identified. Maybe it was paranormal, who knows? But now I work day shifts and do not plan on working night shifts again anytime soon. That's the end of the story. Alright. Then I'm going to give this Downwell a go here. And then move on to the next story. Boulder style. Oh. Oh. Alright. So, got a couple of stories to pick from Scary Tinder story and my experience growing up in northern Ontario. I think I'll start with the Scary Tinder story. Hopefully it doesn't get really bad. It's Tinder. Never know. Okay. Scary Tinder story by Mr. Giant, 1999. Just for some background info, I am a 18-year-old male currently living in New York. I am 6'4" and buff. I've always been the center of ridicule and teasing from a young age due to my size. Just for some context, I stopped growing in the 9th grade 4 years ago. I was already done with puberty and had a full-on beard and was adult-like. I took advantage of this sometimes to much, which led me losing my virginity in the 9th grade to a girl who was in college. This story takes place when I was in the 10th grade. I was lonely after a breakup with my then 7-month-old girlfriend. I was looking for a one-night stand, so I turned to Tinder. I set up a fake profile with my real picture and waited. There was this gorgeous girl whom I matched with. This girl was too good to be true, which gave me the first red flag, yet I went along with it anyway. We exchanged innocent messages and planned to meet at her place the next day at around 9 p.m. I wasn't as excited as you would think because I had some doubts on this girl, because I didn't know if she was real. So 9 p.m. rolls around and I get ready to go to her place. I mentally prepared myself if anything crazy was going to go down. Before I left, I texted my dad saying I was going to a friend's house and left. I asked my good friend Isaac, who was around 6 years, who was 6 years my senior, to drive me since he had a car. He warned me to be cautious as I was, long story short, he drives me to her apartment and I ring the doorbell. I hear light footsteps behind the door and high-pitched voice saying, "Be right there." And that's when I texted my friend telling him everything is fine and that he should leave. Boy, was I wrong. The door opens to the girl in the picture. I immediately felt excited, which didn't last for long. On my Tinder account, I wrote that I was 24, when really I was only 15. She, not knowing this, swiftly asked me if I wanted a drink. I said I didn't want anything, which visibly made her facial expression turn from happy to pissed off. I realized that maybe I was going to be drugged. I was not about to take any chance, so I asked to go to the bathroom. She then, out of the blue, said sure, happily. Again, her weird response confirmed my theory in my head. I go to the bathroom and quickly text my friend to come back and pick me up. Then I, out if the corner of my eye, I saw a figure dressed in all black standing in the shower trying to hide behind the curtain. I figure he saw me looking him because not even 2 seconds later he lunged at me. I was scared shitless even though I was massively taller than this man. He tried pushing me to the floor, yet to no avail. I overpowered him too vastly. I grabbed him by the shirt and looked him in the eye. He was around 5'10", sorta buff, mid-30s, bald, and looked to be of Russian descent. I pushed him on the floor and cursed him out because I also know Russian. He tells me to fuck myself, which is when I punched in the face. There I was, a 15-year-old retard in a bathroom with a knocked out man. I panicked, but I kept my cool and took out my phone and took many photos of the man. By then, my friend texted me and told me he was outside of the building waiting for me. But also by then the girl opened the door to the bathroom and started to scream. I pushed her with all my power and sprinted the hell out of that apartment. When I got to my friend's car, I frantically explained to him what happened. Only then I realized I could have been drugged. Profile and messages between us. Even though I had all the proof in the world to lock those assholes up, I didn't because I was that scared of my parents and lying to them. Moral of the story, be very cautious when dating online. That's the end of the story. Well, time to give it another go. Level 2. Timeout. Blast module. And blast module's better. Pop, pop, pop. Oh! Oh gosh. Uh-oh. Yeah. Bye-bye. Alright. On to the next story. And this will be the last one, which will wrap up the video for today. The name of this story is My Experience Growing Up in Northern Ontario by Sugar and Chime. Mostly because I grew up in Northern Ontario and it's rare to see it mentioned on the internet at all. I was shocked to read a post by someone which detailed their experiences on a camping trip around the area I am from. I had read the post simply out of curiosity, but some of the things written in it stood out to me. When I investigated the comments and found out that the author was describing the exact area in which I grew up, I certainly hadn't expected that. Ontario is gigantic. What are the odds? My blood ran cold. First, I think I should provide some background. As I said above, northern Ontario constitutes a large area of Canada and even of Ontario. Besides this, it is sparsely populated. The towns are small, few, and far between, linked only by the Trans-Canada Highway in between them. Long swaths of dense, dark forest, maybe a few trails for skiing, but largely uninhabited. I grew up near these forests, but didn't really venture into them too much until my dad bought a large property when I was about 10. The property was gigantic, about 500 acres, dirt cheap, and mostly forests or exposed rocks that so characterizes the Canadian Shield landscape. Someone there had owned horses, so there were two very overgrown fields, grass up past your head, and a couple chicken coops. It even had some trails running through part of it, from the house to a large river that we could go swimming in, to an old abandoned mine shaft, and connected to the backs of other properties. Despite the worry of bears, and I can't count how many bears I've come across there, I hike these trails nearly daily. I have always loved the outdoors, and there was nothing I liked better than being alone in the middle of nowhere. Not another human in sight. Of course, I brought my dog, Rudy, with me for safety. He was an expert bear chaser. Mostly these walks were uneventful. I would get to the river, take a swim, and head back home. The walk there and back took about 2 hours. The creepiest part was probably the last leg to the river. It would break out of the forest to some rolling plains, which were bare due to the large power lines up. You would take the trail along these hills, parallel to the forest, until you reached the water. There was a loud droning hum in the air the entire way, due to the power lines. Besides that, complete silence except for my own voice. I always sang on the trails. It was a good way to warn bears away from you. The thing about bears is that they don't want to fight you or even be near you if you give them a good warning that you're approaching. They usually clear out. Some people play radios. I would sing. The first thing that I can remember happening was that I was walking along the hill path, singing like I always did, and the droning silence behind my voice was broken by a weird bleeding sound. Rudy took off, running towards it immediately, so I followed him cautiously. I thought it might be a deer or something, so I was intrigued. For how large the property was, I really never saw a deer on it except once, which I'm getting to. So I was curious. When I caught up to Rudy, he was cornering the path next to the woods, barking furiously. I hung back a couple yards because it immediately became apparent to me that this was not a deer. I couldn't see what it was, but I could see the bush thrashing wildly, the tree branches swinging low to the ground. Whatever it was, Rudy had frightened it back into the cub for But the size of the animal required to make that large of a racket had me suspecting a bear. It wasn't retreating, but I wasn't about to continue forward. So I turned around and headed home. The next day I was in the house, and it was near twilight. I had an unspoken rule. I never went outside after dark. You would be stupid to. Everyone has stories about a relative attacked by coyotes after dark, or coming in between an aggressive bear and your garbage can. So I stayed inside. I was on my balcony reading when my brother pointed out something in the fields to me. The fact we could see this thing at all was amazing. The grass in the field was high due to years of neglect, but there it was, this massive buck. He was just enormous, at least 8 feet tall. We thought it might be a moose at first, but his face was far too delicate looking, and there was no mistaking those giant sharp antlers. He stood in the field, gazing at the house, not moving as the sky darkened. It must have left in the night. My brother was angry the next morning. Had been barking at something. He reported hearing an odd noise, but was mostly just mad. The dog. I didn't think anything much of it. We thought maybe he had chased away the deer or something. Inspection of the chicken coops when we went to feed them before school revealed that some of our hens were missing, and we found the feathery remains of one of them a yard or so away from the coop, on the edge of the horse field. Maybe Rudy had been chasing away raccoons or foxes instead. I don't know when this happened, but it was some time after. On our way home from school, the bus dropped us off on the edge of the highway, and we would have a long walk home down the driveway. We looked down the side of the path and saw something standing about 200 meters away. I went to see my brother last week, and I brought it up with him because it had been on my mind since I read that post. I asked him if he remembered that time we were walking from the bus and we saw something. He said yes, laughed a bit, and I asked him to describe it. It was tall, white, on 2 feet, he said. See, I thought so too. I remember it being on 4 feet at first and then standing up until it was on 2. I remember it was white. It was white. It looked a bit like a deer, and we saw it, and it must have seen us because it just walked away into the woods on 2 feet. I don't know what it was, though. Did you ever see it again? No. I had, though. For a while, I kept hearing that weird bleeding noise at night, and our chickens kept disappearing. Then our ducks went. Even though they were locked into the coop at night, then the feral cat colony in the barn started being picked off, a couple at a time. I dreamed about a messed up animal once around that time. It was an animal that began as a crane, flying low to the ground, and morphed into a decaying centaur-like creature as it stumbled to the ground from flight. It shape-shifted. Tumorous and bruised, it was screaming in that bleeding voice. almost like human, but not quite. Sniffed the air blindly, charged at me. I woke up just as it touched me. I don't know what it was. Maybe I was just upset by the cats disappearing and our livestock going, and I had a nightmare about it. Maybe it was nothing. I'm not here to say any of this was something supernatural, just that it happened, and that it was weird. Eventually, we stopped hearing the bleeding noises at night. I stopped hiking. I moved away to go to school with my boyfriend, and I visited my dad at his property, and I took him for a walk. He said the place gave him the heebie-jeebies. Why? This feels like prime Wendigo. Prime Wendigo country. What the hell is a Wendigo? I'll tell you what a Wendigo is now that I know. Back in the day, if a community became cut off from food, they might resort to cannibalism in order to survive. But it caused me madness. It was also called Wendigo sickness. Was it only a legend created to explain these people who would resort to eating family and friends? A Wendigo is a witch. Ojibwe's and many other indigenous people have a legend about Wendigos. It is a witch. It was a person that desired power, and so badly that they paid a terrible price for the ability of shape-shifting and immortality. They become mad with corruption. They are always hungry and feed on anything. But above all else, they're cannibals. They're so old and wretched that they look like zombies in their real form. Graying skin, necrosis, bloated bellies from gorging themselves on any flesh they can find. Wendigos are pure greed and hunger. They can shapeshift. They can turn into a person, into an animal. A masterful Wendigo can imitate a human voice or a baby's crying to lure you over. A baby's crying to lure you over. Get you lost in the woods, then they strike. Well, they can infiltrate a group and pick you off one by one. They mostly hunt at night. You're never supposed to whistle at night because it attracts bad spirits, Wendigos included. Northern Ontario is unceded indigenous land. Upon further investigation, I realized that my boyfriend was right. This was prime Wendigo country. I had been so preoccupied with singing to keep away the bears that I had never thought about what I might be luring home with me. That's the end of the story, and that will be the final story on tonight's Monday, this day, the video for today, this day. Please do enjoy, like, subscribe, leave comments, support. Please do. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the support. Love all of it. All the bad stuff can be put somewhere else, but come here. Love that you watched my video and chose to experience it. So hope it was good, and hope things are always good. So enjoy, and bye bye.